Hello and welcome to our COVID-19 Global Conversation Series hosted by the Henry M. Jackson School of International Studies at the University of Washington. I am Scott Radnitz, an associate professor at the Jackson School, and today I am interviewing Dimash Alzhanov, who is a political analyst from Kazakhstan who works with the reformist political movement Wake Up Kazakhstan. Due to the format and time considerations, you'll find a link to both of our full bios on the webpage hosting the series. So I'd like to welcome Dimash, who will be giving us a brief update and overview of what's been happening in Kazakhstan over the last few weeks. So thank you for joining us, Dimash.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
So first off, for our audience who may not be very familiar with Kazakhstan, could you maybe just give a brief overview of what the situation politically looked like in Kazakhstan before this outbreak began?
Mm-hmm. Yes. If you know that Kazakhstan is one of the former Soviet republics, it's, Kazakhstan rated by the VDEM as an autocracy, electoral autocracy. There is not much democracy here in Kazakhstan. So if you know the Russia is quite familiar to you, will be then the political context is almost the same. So we have the one president who is keeping the power, and we have the very fragmented oppositional groups and the civic activists who is trying to change the situation. So our government is not accountable and not elected. So we don't have free and fair elections since our independence.
And it might be worth mentioning what happened recently as the longtime president stepped into retirement, but not completely. And maybe you can explain how that worked.
Yeah, so he's still in power. He's still controlling the politics in Kazakhstan. Officially, he is not a president anymore. He did step down and took the position of the head of the Security Council. So he created the Security Council on the top of the presidency, and they put his friend as a president, very loyal person to him. So we don't have the separation of powers in its classical meaning. So they controlling the legislative and they controlling the executive branch in one hands. So, and he's still, they're controlling the politics in the country.
And so, and there were some street protests in the months before this all started in March. What were people protesting about?
So there were several protests since the presidential elections the last summer in June. So one of our movements, one of those groups who are organizing this protest in Kazakhstan. So mainly we're trying to shape the political agenda, saying that there is a time. So the dictator is getting old. He's coming. He's going to leave soon the politics. So he's now 80 years old. So he's not in position physically and mentally to lead the country. And the way he is ruling, they keep us, move us backward, not forward. So the main idea to change the political system, to make the elections and other democratic mechanisms work.
And how successful were these protests?
Well, we are having the good support in the big cities, as long as, there's a lot of young people, students who are studying in universities, the middle class living in the big cities. I'm talking about the Almaty and the capital Astana. But of course, our influence in a rural area, not so, let's say, significant at this stage, but nevertheless, in the regional level, there's also the people protesting because they're poor.
Okay, so this is the scene when coronavirus arrives. So when you first found out about it, how did people react? How did the government react? And how did life change in Kazakhstan?
Well, I think that people started to expect something like the quarantine when they, start to know about the coronavirus that appeared in Wuhan, in China. We're bordering with China. So, the people expected at some point that the government will impose these measures. And it took them 2 months. Only in the second part of the March, on the 20th of March, they imposed the quarantine. Firstly, in the two big cities, Almaty and Astana, and then after the numbers of positive tests across the country in other cities as well.
And officially, how many cases are there of COVID-19 in Kazakhstan? Positive.
Now it's more than 1,700 cases.
And how many people have died?
13.
13.
13.
So I was following news in Central Asia as the virus was already spreading to Europe. And it was kind of notable how all the countries around Central Asia had lots of cases. And yet in these 5 countries, no cases were reported for a very, very long time, which makes one suspect that either they're not testing, so they don't know that people have the virus, or they know, but they're just not saying so. Which of those do you think was correct?
I think that by now we only aware that Turkmenistan and Tajikistan is trying to deny as much as possible or hide the information about all these cases, saying that it's not the coronavirus, it's pneumonia, and trying to not to impose any quarantine measures. In the case of Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, they already acknowledge, they already trying to adopt the anti-crisis measures because they do understand that locking down the people will have a negative effect on economies as well. So there's some work is going on. But of course, yeah, in the case of also Turkmenistan, the president who is firstly completely denied the word coronavirus. So you can imagine how they act.
Can you describe a little bit about what kinds of measures have been taken? What it feels like where you live in Almaty? Can you are you allowed to go out into the street? Are you allowed to go for groceries? How closely are people being monitored on the street? What is the social distancing situation like?
Mm-hmm. So I think our government trying to combine the Chinese strategy with some novelties here. So at the beginning it was quite very strict, and still it's very strict measures, quarantine measures. So you're not allowed just to walk on the street or to take the bike. The only thing that you can do is go to the grocery for shopping and then go back, or to the pharmacy. So only the pharmacies are working right now. We have a delivery system that is working, and those companies who applied for permission now allowed to to do delivery service across the city. But the people on the street, you can go with the pairs, but you cannot gather in groups. When you walk, you have to keep the mask. You're not allowed to go to the shop, to the grocery, definitely, or queue up if you don't have mask. So, and the police is trying to watch and make sure that people are doing the things. But in these terms, I think that we are doing okay. I mean, like it's like everywhere. There's not much pressure on citizens in comparison, for example, with Russia. But we have bad political consequences of this quarantine measures.
So it's not like in Wuhan where you had to have a document stating where you're going, or else you can get fined. You're allowed to walk, and as long as you're going somewhere necessary and you won't be harassed? Only
if you go to the grocery or pharmacy. So you cannot walk across the city. You can walk in your, for example, yard within the city where there's not much police, and you can take a take a fresh air. But yes, you cannot walk across all the city, and it's prohibited.
Mm-hmm. And what's the situation there with the healthcare system? Are people who are sick able to get the treatment that they need? Are there stories about hospitals not having the resources to be able to treat everybody, like there have been in New York, for example?
Well, we have different healthcare systems, and in addition to that, we have very bad funded healthcare systems. So, yes, they do have facilities, and by now we do not have much cases where there's completely the out of all equipment. However, there is numerous cases when the even medical staff, I mean the hospital workers, medics, they don't have the special equipment. So they, especially in the other cities, because Almaty relatively is a rich city and well organized, and the healthcare system here is better funded. But in the regions, yes, there was a cases when the medics, they started to complain about all these cases because they were infected without any special equipment.
And have you heard about how rural areas are doing in comparison with the big cities like where you live? Are rural areas struggling to cope? And the central government?
I expect so. Because if we have these problems with equipment, with salaries in the big cities, so definitely there's something wrong in a rural area. The Kazakhstan, in these terms, not well organized in terms of sustainability of the regions. So they always getting money from the center. So the government, the redistributive role of the government is high. So if the government not funding local hospitals or healthcare system, they definitely not prepared for treating the patient in the right way.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you a few questions about how you're getting information and how well you think the government is communicating, and whether there are alternative sources of information to what the government is saying. So first off, I mean, do you think that, based on what you know about the media and the government, that you're able to get accurate information about what coronavirus looks like in Kazakhstan?
Well, not sure. So there is a little trust to the government. So as long as they're not elected, not accountable to us, there is after 30 years of a one-person rule, there is a little trust to the government. So of course, everyone is expecting that the numbers they give or the cases they try to promote in the media, that somehow favorable for them. And the other case that they're trying to now arrest the civic activist who is criticizing them publicly in the social media. So we have two cases. Just 2 days ago, they arrested very well-known two civic activists, and one of them was released until the court for 2 months, and the other one is still arrested. So, and they were arrested because they were criticized the government, and I think in this situation you cannot trust them.
So, how much do people there check social media in order to get an independent source of information from the government?
I think if you, familiar with the situation in Kazakhstan, the only source of more trusted information appear in the social media, because the independent journalists and the media outlets, they present the information through the social media. We don't watch TV channels because they're controlled by the government, and there is no need for them for us to watch it.
So basically,
we cannot trust them.
Yeah. So if you're monitoring both sources of information, is there a gap between then what you're hearing on television and what you're hearing from social media, or?
Well, definitely. All these cases when the doctors try to complain about the lack of equipment, all those cases where the students who brought from abroad having the problems in facilities that not prepared well for the quarantine. All this information comes from the social media, from independent journalists, or from the regular citizens who's posting this information, and then it started to circulate across the whole internet.
And do you think people are mostly able to get credible information from social media? I mean, while it's an independent check on official sources, there's also the possibility of misinformation circulating on social media. Conspiracy theories, claims about who's responsible, or false treatments that don't actually work. Is there some of that also circulating?
Well, definitely yes. I mean, as a social media and the effect of the social media, we do understand that there's the good and bad's coming from them, and we have to. I mean, again, everyone should check again and make sure that the sources are credible. There is nothing much you can do with this. Of course, the people speculating, the politicians are speculating, and things are going on.
What are the most common conspiracy theories that you've heard? Are there any that are prominent?
Well, in the beginning, of course, I mean, people start to think that it's a Chinese weapon, and then chemical weapon, and then it's not a big deal. It's like a regular flu, so it's all the fake, the thing like that. So I mean, like usual stuff that appears, I think, across the world. And there is not much history, and there is not much politics about calling it definitely Chinese virus or whatsoever. So it's a bit the different context.
When you talk to your friends and colleagues, how much do you get a sense that people believe some of these conspiracy theories, or do you think that people, at least in your circles, are getting good information?
In my circle, definitely people are getting more credible information, and I think they're capable to analyze it. At the beginning, it was a bit misunderstanding because, there is no, I mean, the people first time they hear about all these things, and the government wasn't sure how they should act in this way, how they should provide the information, and there was a lack of information. When you have a lack of information and censorship imposed by the government, you have a space for all these conspiracy things. And it was like that at the beginning. But now it's more or less clear for everyone that it's a problem and you have to follow certain procedures.
It's often the case during public health crises that people look for someone to blame, and in the U.S. there's been racism, xenophobia directed against Asian Americans. Have you seen actually a lot of people blaming China or Chinese people working in Kazakhstan? Has there? I mean, even before this outbreak, I think there was some animosity in general toward China. Have you seen that flare up since this started?
I don't think so, but yeah, traditionally people like to blame China for the many things, and because they're afraid, because of historical image, etc. But no, I can't say that it's the such hate information is increasing.
And what about relations with Kazakhstan's other neighbors? I know they shut down the border pretty early on. Do you get the sense that the government is coordinating with its neighbors, like Uzbekistan or with Russia, and are they working together to plan strategies?
I don't think that we can talk about the planning strategies, but definitely they do coordinate, because a lot of people was stuck in the border when they shut down the borders, and they have to transport them from, for example, Turkey, and the Kazakhstan cooperated with Kyrgyzstan to bring all the citizens together through the Kazakhstan, and the certain things were implemented in coordination, of course, with neighboring countries. But I wouldn't say that there is something much bigger. I think that our government is not capable for that at this stage.
Of the few countries in the world where the governments deny that there is coronavirus in the country or that it's a problem, two of those are in Central Asia, and that is Tajikistan and Turkmenistan. What are you hearing about what's going on there?
So not much. Again, they're very pretty much closed countries. Not much information coming out from these countries because of their political regimes. We do know that there's a big number of about 100, roughly 100 citizens of Tajikistan. They stuck in Russia because they were kicked out from Russia, and Tajikistan not taking any measures to bring them back to the country. We do know that in Turkmenistan, they denied even the word of coronavirus, and now they start to acknowledge that this is a problem. But still, there is nothing like the measures that we can see in other countries, like a quarantine and mass testing.
Are people there afraid or angry that even if you manage to suppress the virus in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, that because these other countries will have much higher rates of infection, that could actually endanger your countries when things open up again?
I think that at this stage we are living in a complete uncertainty. We don't know what to expect. There is no such a thing like a scenario or the plan of the government saying we are thinking in this case we will do the certain things, in other case we will do certain things. There's nothing like this explanation, and I think that people don't know what to expect. They saying that's the quarantine until the 1st May, but again, if the other country is not taking much measures, we can expect the thing that you're talking about, that they will spread again the virus. So there is no strategy, there is no information, there is no vision how to deal with this.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. So if the government isn't keeping people informed about what its plans are people starting to discuss among themselves what they think might happen or what they want to happen?
Well, again, they a bit frustrated because if you compare with the plan of your government, you paid actually every citizen more than $1,000 to keep them somehow with the thing they need. Here, the government is paying $99 each citizen who lost their job or the income only. So, and the people, very stressful, nervous, frustrated. They don't know what to expect, and they don't know what's the economic situation going to be because, again, our economy rely on the oil prices, and you know what's happening right now on the markets. So they went down the prices. And I think that the recovery of the economy will take up to 3 years as minimum. So, and it's really the bad feelings we have right now about the future.
So yeah. So I mean, while we're talking about the future, then I wonder. It's always hard to predict, but you're both a political analyst and an activist. What do you see? How do you see this changing your country? In the short and medium term, after the outbreak ends and things open up again, do you think that this will change the relationship between the government and its citizens? Will it change the possibilities for civic activism? What do you think might happen?
Well, I think they try to use it, the state of emergency and the quarantine. So the state of emergency is limiting your rights and freedoms right now. So you cannot go on the square and protest. So they're using this time, as I said, they arrested already 2 activists. They are intimidating the others. And because the society cannot protest right now, and the only thing that they can do is just to express their opinion on the social media. So in addition to that, they're trying to adopt important political legal acts on the regulation on the political parties, regulations related to the parliament and the members of the parliament, so on. So when the society is not able to mobilize and interact with the government by using their rights and freedoms or the political means as a protest and the rallies, they're doing all these things. And I think that the outcome of this will be very negative for us because they will give them more power and additional reasons to keep us arrested or intimidated by increasing the days of arrest, for example, with a public assembly law. and etc. So I don't expect much. That situation will improve. It will get worse.
All right. And on that note, is there anything else you'd like to
add? Not much. So we'll see what the future brings, and hope to again continue our work and activity.
Okay. Well, this is a good conversation. I should have mentioned to our audience that you are 13 hours ahead, so it's very late at night for you. And I appreciate that you were able to take the time to speak from my home to yours, from Seattle to Almaty. So again, I'd just like to thank Dimash Alzhanov for joining us, and thank you for watching. And if you want to learn more about our online events and program, you can go to jsas.washington.edu and check out the other videos in the series.
Thank you for having me.